Was it out of the pro-life movement? Was it more conspiracy theory? So that's all really interesting and very political and public facing, right? And then there's the basement talks, which is interpersonal, right? And it's not strategic, right? You're not, the whole point is to not be trying to come up with your answer while they're telling you to listen.
Well, welcome everyone. I am so excited to have you joining me at the table today to talk about some of the most important, or one of the most important topics that I think we have in today's culture. We've been dealing with this topic for many, many years, and there's so many people that need to be able to come to the table and talk about pro-life, pro-choice, and what it means to them. And so you guys have done an incredible job on doing just that. And Josh and Sarah, thank you so much for creating this incredible series called The Basement Talks. I was so intrigued and just loved watching this series, every minute of it, the unfolding, the storytelling of it. It blew me away. I have to tell you guys, I sat down, I watched it. I binged the entire series in one sitting. I loved every minute of it.
That's a triumph of perseverance.
It was so good. And what I loved that you guys did so well is you brought this criminal, this series to life through the story of the history and this trial, and then these women who were coming together and talking about something, and one of the most controversial topics I think that any of us really are facing today in our world. And obviously we're seeing it again. So Josh, Sarah, thank you again for doing this. Thank you for bringing this story to life. Talk a little bit about why the basement talks. How did you come across this? And what was this like for you when you both were sitting there? You guys are married, you work together, you're telling stories. What is this like when you sit down and you go, you know what, I think this is our next project? And when you started to dig in, what was it like to bring this series to life?
Yeah, well, honestly, I think we were not thinking, oh, let's go tell a story about abortion, right? That's a pretty scary topic. But we did want to deal with what we were seeing in the country with polarization, toxic polarization, and this inability to communicate across fundamental differences. And we were looking for stories. We actually looked for a few different stories, trying to find a story that would really capture the essence of the problem and also some possible solutions. And anyways, my brother sent me an article that was written in 2001. It was published in the Boston Globe, and it was written by these women. And I read the article, and I was living in Boston at the time. And so we started to reach out, and it was a bit of a process, honestly, to get everyone on board. I know particularly, Fran can speak to this some, I know several of the pro-life women were particularly nervous about being involved in this film. I think they'd been burned by the media plenty of times. And we're a little skeptical of what we might do with it. Anne was a supporter. Anne's here with us on the call. She was a supporter from the beginning. I think she really helped it happen. She really felt like this was an important story that needed to get out. And ultimately, they met together and decided that they'd participate in our movie and tell the story in a more public facing way than it's ever been told before.
Wow. So Sarah, what was this like for you digging into this story, and how do you two work together? And when you guys started the story and the topic, did you know where you guys were going to start with the storyline and how it was going to go, and what was the link then? What was the process? Because I know for me as a filmmaker, I think, we just did a movie last year that took us, close to 7 years to make and to see it come to life. So what was that? What was the length for you guys in making the basement talks as well?
Yeah, well, so I remember we started we started reaching out to the women during COVID. I think COVID was still pretty active. We met them remotely. And then for some of the interviews, we were the first people back in their homes after the lockdowns. We filmed masked. So that puts it back probably in 2001, I think.
That's 2021.
Yeah, 2021. Sorry, 2021. 2021 when we were first um and so it was a process. Yeah, it's been a while. And I think mostly the experience was just it was really humbling for us to be able to be trusted with a story that's so I think important and I would say even sacred, but also that takes really delicate storytelling, to be able to share in all of its dignity and goodness. And so we were so grateful. I think just through the whole process, we were really grateful to be able to have this story and to be able to share it.
I love that you just said that, delicate, because I do think that's that's a beautiful word to describe this, because it is, to talk about something that is so powerful to so many of us. And we're supposed to love and be kind and gracious to one another, and to be able to have these conversations and talk about it. And so I love that you use the word delicate. And I really believe, even watching the series, I loved how, and Francis and Anne, I would love to pull you into this conversation and talk a little bit about this, but man, I mean, what you ladies, how you ended up going through so much that you did during this time. And I'm going to have you tell us a little bit about kind of how this process began for you. But to see you ladies together and to hear you talking together in a basement for so many years, and I want you to share with the audience that story, is so powerful to me. I sat there on the couch, and first of all, as a woman and who has gone through so many different things in my life, it was so powerful for me to sit there and watch all of you ladies who were, whether you were pro-choice or pro-life, to come together and just be gracious and kind to one another and have powerful conversations about not only, choice or pro-life, but about the women in general. And so I'd love for you to jump in. Francis, maybe I can start with you, and talk a little bit about how you ladies came together, what this was like for you, how this all began, and this trial. And you ladies lived through this process, so I would love to hear a little bit from you and how this all started for you.
Well, as somebody mentioned, maybe, um, I was extremely nervous about being involved in the beginning, because we had been burned so much by the media over the years from the pro-life perspective, and the energy required to become involved in this. There was a concern that it would take away from the energy we have for the substance of the cause. However, after we talked about it for quite a while, the three pro-life women, we finally decided to go ahead and do it. But it was scary, is the only word I can use for us, I think. And those, I think Anne would agree, the first few meetings were extremely tense and very, very difficult, trying to learn a new language, a new way to speak about the issue. And Nikki Nichols Gamble, who was one of the women, was at the time the head of Planned Parenthood. And for those of us within the pro-life community, she was an icon of the pro-choice movement. I had been on debates and things with her, but I'd never actually spoken to her like one human being to another. So it was an extraordinary time for me. And from the beginning to the end, we became friends. In the beginning, we barely talked to each other. I mean, Ian may have a different take, I'm not sure.
What was the last thing you said, Fran?
I was talking about the fact that at the beginning, it was difficult to speak with each other, but by the end, we had actually become friends.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I think that you were more anxious to be involved in the conversations than the pro-life people were. The pro-choice people were more than happy. I think you can speak to that yourself, Anne, to be involved.
Well, for one thing, I'd had some previous experience with the Public Conversations Project, and I had done some short dialogues, and one that was longer, that was like a day-long thing that they recorded. And I had also been involved in the church with doing dialogues, pro-life, pro-choice, which I think is how the Public Conversations Project found me. And I felt as if this was a great opportunity and something that my faith called me to do.
I I completely understand that, and I think that that was a big part for all of us. I know that the three pro-life women before the first meeting, we all met in a local ice cream shop and we prayed over the table and over the ice cream because we were so nervous about going into this, concerned about causing scandal, concerned about our constituencies not understanding what we were actually doing. And that's why it was so critical to us that it be completely confidential and that no one know about it.
How
I,
long and
can I
go ahead,
just say
Annie.
one more thing? I think
Sure.
everybody but me was nervous. That's Melissa heading NARAL pro-choice, Nikki heading Planned Parenthood. How are they going to explain to their boards what they were doing? I felt like I was the only person who had nothing to lose and everything to gain.
Wow.
Right.
Well, I love that perspective. And how, when, and forgive me in this process. I know, I mean, I loved watching the storytelling of how you guys brought the basement talks together, because, you know, you started off with these women and they started talking about how they were going to come together, and you went immediately into, you know, this trial and this crime that happens, right? And it's so devastating because the rhetoric that we hear all the time and the things that are going on, even in our culture today, you know, this is something that can happen so easily again. And so, you know, you started the story process, and is that where you had decided initially right away to start how you were going to start telling the story of the basement talks?
Yeah. So we sort of started at the beginning, because these talks would never have happened if it weren't for a series of murders and shootings that happened in Boston. It happened. It was a very dramatic incident. People may remember in the 90s when John Salvi walked into two separate abortion clinics and opened fire, killing two receptionists and injuring, I think, 5 others, and then went to another abortion clinic and shot it up. No one was injured there because it was closed. But he was captured.
Yeah.
It was a day later, and thus began a whole sort of crazy court case around John Salvi, and a lot of sort of optics control from both sides of the aisle. People trying to swing the narrative and some, you know, control the narrative. You know, like pro-life being very careful to distance themselves from John Salvi, because killing people, it does not seem pro-life, and you know, the pro-choice movement really trying to capitalize on this, saying, look, we're under attack, we need your support. So that was sort of the context that these began in. So there was this very public facing narrative going on, which is the trial of John Salvi and the sort of the optics around abortion and the different movements sort of politicking to try to control the narrative. But then there's this other sort of subversive thing that began, which was these conversations between these 6 women. They started meeting together, and this was not political. This was not an attempt to control the narrative, but an attempt to understand each other.
I would also say one thing that was so interesting to me when we were working on this movie is a lot of the rhetoric, but also I think a lot of the voices around the trial were pretty masculine. Like, a lot of males were talking, and a lot of it was really competitive and sort of vying for attention, you know, or vying for sound bites. And then sort of underneath all of that, there was this, I think what this writer named Olivia Fry would say was a really womanist approach to rhetoric and to justice and to seeking a new way forward, that was less competitive and grandstanding. Olivia Fry has this amazing essay called Against Literary Darwinism, where she promotes this sort of womanist rhetoric as a means of speaking in a different way in the world, where feelings are validated, and relationships become really core in our communications. Right. And holding those relationships is a key way of moving forward in our means of communicating.
And I honestly don't think they had a clear idea of what they were trying to accomplish exactly. I don't think they had a clear end game. They just knew they had to do something, and so they kind of came together to figure it out as they went.
Governor had asked publicly for talks among pro-life leadership. And as a woman who'd been involved in the movement my entire adult life, it drove me insane when the media would always speak to men either Catholic priests or bishops, and yet the three leaders in the community at that time all happened to be women. And I told the story. One time, Frontline actually came to my house and spent a whole bunch of time recording. And when the show appeared, they showed no women. They showed only men speaking on behalf of the pro-life ethic. So I was, glad in that sense of it representing, as you say, women. And I think it brought a tone to the discussion that may have been different had we not all been women.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, and I think the narrative was so well told, and I really do believe, as a viewer watching it, I believe that is what really I started to recognize was the powerful voices of these women who were coming to the table and wanted to be at the table to discuss this topic, whether you were nervous or not. And I do believe that God created us to be in relationship, and specifically women. I believe we are women creatures that desire relationship. We love to talk about things and to establish conversation. And I think you ladies did that so well. And so often it seems that, we're so separated by things that yet we actually, once we come together and sit down and talk about it, we have so many things in common. And I think that was the beautiful thing about watching you all together, was that you really do have a lot in common. There are things, and so I'd love to talk a little bit about that. When was it when all of this was happening and this tragedy that happened? After that, how long did it take before you all were finding yourselves in this basement, having these conversations and really starting to talk about how to make a difference?
I think it was about 9 months. Salvi, it was the 31st of 30th or 31st of December. And then the next fall, I believe, it was when we started meeting.
That's right.
So it was quite a endeavor, I think, for the public conversations people. They interviewed, I think they said something like 25 people, and picked the 6 of us and figured out what they were going to do. I mean, to some degree, and it was really good that it started as promptly as it did.
When you say that, Anne, about, sorry, Frances.
I was just going to say, part of it was to lower the rhetoric too, was a huge part of why we agreed to participate.
Absolutely. And who was it that brought you all together to talk about it? Who was that started to orchestrate the plans to kind of say, hey, we want you guys to come together and talk about this?
It's a nonprofit. It was called the Public Conversations Project, and it's now called something else.
I think essential
somethings. And as I said, I had done some things with them before.
Wonderful. And when I thought it was fascinating, and I would have loved to, and maybe this is the follow-up to the docu-series. Maybe there's a second portion of this. I would have loved to I would have loved to have been one of those women sitting there listening to y'all talk about and having that first conversation about how you actually started to formulate that conversation, how you started to come together. And I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall, just to be in there to hear you all, and what was that like for you ladies? I know that you've said nervous, and there was, I'm sure that there was some anxiety and some fear, or maybe even a little frustration, but how did those conversations start with you ladies? I mean, was it, I honestly, I can't even imagine what was the very first thing that you put up on the whiteboard and said, here, we're going to tackle this. And then, and everybody kind of goes, okay, here we go. I mean, what was that like for you ladies? What was the first thing that you all kind of stepped into and tackled together?
I guess I'd say that we really didn't talk a lot at the first meeting in terms of free flow conversation, because there were no words we could use, which was a major problem. We had to figure out a way to talk without using all of our ordinary conversation. So the meeting was, I would say, very tense, very nerve-wracking, the first few meetings. But we learned how to speak in a way that didn't offend the other party. And we also learned how to listen to what the other person was saying without coming up with our response. And often we found that they didn't say what we thought they said, which was a huge for us to realize, I think, but it wasn't easy from the beginning. There's no question about that.
Wow. And did you have, this was something I would think I was trying to work through too, is was there a mediator? Was there somebody who was constantly there with you ladies who was working together to, kind of guide you through the process? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, you watched the series and you saw Susan Podziba. So she was one. And the other, unfortunately, has died, Laura Chasen, who was the visionary, and she was also a Rockefeller, which I think helped fund some of her projects. And Susan was the enforcer. She was the she had done mediation with groups even tougher than us, I think.
Well,
I didn't know Laura was a Rockefeller till after Laura died. I had no idea.
Okay. Well, and I love, and I'm asking some questions for people who haven't seen the series yet, so that they can watch and kind of understand who was bringing you all together. And I thought it was fascinating because I thought, what an incredible task to this story, to the narrative, to bring together a group and have somebody who mediators, and to talk about such a critical topic for all of us, to be able to come to the table and talk about something so intense for so many of us, right?
I want to get something in before I forget to say it. And that is that early on, I realized that this process was the closest thing I was ever going to experience must have been what the early church was like, when Jews and Gentiles got together in a basement and broke bread together and talked. And what held them together was the liturgy. And what held us together was Susan and Laura.
It would never have happened. We could never have sat in a room without those two people. It would never have happened.
Wow. Yeah, and I love that reference. I love that reference to breaking bread. One of my favorite parts of the movie is Barbara Thorpe. Thanks, Barbara Thorpe. She was the head of pro-life office of the Archdiocese in Boston, and she talks about how they went out to eat at one point together, which must have been a bit risky thing to be seen in a restaurant together. I don't know. You have to tell me about that. Maybe you went in a back room. I don't know. But they.
That was one of my favorites. They were talking about going to a restaurant and sitting down together to eat. And I thought, I'm sure there probably was all these emotions that were going through all of you, thinking somebody's going to see me and how am I going to be able to explain this?
And didn't we get one dessert and 6 spoons or something like that?
Yes, and you were all taking bites, and I thought that's a beautiful thing, especially for women and dessert too, right?
Yeah. So, well, I imagine. I don't know what it was. Do you know what the dessert was?
Can't remember.
In my head, it was cake. In my head, it's cake because that's like highly sweetened bread. So it's like there it is. They broke bread together and they shared the bread, and she talks about it as a super sacred moment in her life that they could sit and partake of this sweetness together.
Yeah.
And think nothing of it. And that was to me, that's a profoundly, I think, Christian thing to break bread together with everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love
we weren't embarrassed to be with each other or concerned about scandal. We got to that point eventually, that we could be seen in public.
How long did it take, and forgive me, how long did it take from the time that you started, meeting together till the time that you did go and break bread together? I know it was some time.
Well, we broke bread together every time we met, because we always had dinner there, and we met because people were working, and we met after work. and there's another thing I want to get in, which is that a year after the clinic killings, we had a memorial service at a big synagogue in Brookline, and right down the street from the Planned Parenthood clinics. And I was asked to preside, and so I was up there looking before the thing started, and in walked two of the. Fran, did you come?
Yes, I did.
And was it Madeline?
No, it was Barbara.
Barbara.
So seeing these two pro-life women walk into 700 pro-life people, and
Pro-choice.
it was very moving, very, very moving.
Wow.
Yeah, so they came into it was like a church, right? And it was full of
temple, synagogue.
It was a temple.
Yeah.
And it was for the memorial of the shootings, and it was a big pro-choice gathering, and in walked these two pro-life women. Really touching moment in the film.
Absolutely. I was going to say, I remember that moment thinking, what a beautiful moment for you ladies to come together and show your support and to be there. And those are really big moments, especially in the series. I thought going there, making sure that you wanted people to know that you were there, you wanted to be a part of this, that you were mourning as well, and you were there to show respect. There was all these things that were going through my mind watching that. And so that's one of the things I think Josh and Sarah, you all did so well, is you really showed these beautiful moments that took place between these ladies that opened up the narrative and the conversation. That is a real reminder for all of us that we need to be able to sit down together, break bread, and have conversations that might not be easy, but are critical to our culture and our society today. And how do we do that? Looking at one another, knowing that we're in the image of God. Like, how do we know and do that and do it right? And you just did such a great job. And I love that you ladies were so open about your journey as well. I want to, because there's so many questions. I mean, there's so many things I want to ask you about, but when you sat back and you watched the series, Francis and Anne, once that it was done and you had a chance to watch the show and watch the full, because first of all, you've got the first kind of 5 episodes, and episode 6 is kind of that wrap up to all of the things that accumulated over the first 5, and then to where we are at today in our culture. What were some of the feelings that you were feeling watching this, and the history that you were involved in, and what you now are lending your voice to and a part of, and what are you hoping for that we as an audience will take away from the series, and how we can affect the culture and the conversation today?
Well, the situation in the country today is so bad that I wish everyone had the opportunity to have the experiences that Anne and I had, because I think the tools that we got from the experience could be used so well today. Half my family, it's hard to talk to people about politics, even here at the law firm. We honestly have trouble talking about politics because of name calling and rhetoric and all the rest of it. And I keep saying, let's have a civil conversation, and they all laugh at me. But the truth is that there's so much that could be learned from this at the highest levels of both parties right now in the electoral situation, I think. It's awful what's going on out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Anne, how about you?
I watched the series for the first time.
Oop, I hope I didn't lose you.
I think an early. Whoops, she's gone.
Oh, she's back.
She's back.
Very good.
It was the train. It was the train.
Sorry. I hope it's done for a while. It just is so nice outside. I can't stand to be inside. I watched it the first time with my brother and sister-in-law, and I think it was an early iteration, and I think anyway, we watched it all at once, and I kept saying, can we just stop and can we go to bed? No, we have to watch the whole thing. And they thought it was absolutely fantastic. And it was really nice to have that perspective of somebody, people I don't see very often. They live in Houston and I live in Boston, and so I felt, it made me feel, you can get sort of, okay, here we go again, but it made me feel really good about doing it. And what I hope people will take from it is the possibility, because we are witnesses, and the film is witnessing a possibility. And I think, particularly speaking to people of faith, it's important to remember that we can sit in the same room with people who we may not agree. And if we go to church, we probably do that every week. But we don't talk about it. And I would encourage people to try on an individual basis, and it's very hard to find people who are on the other side and engage with them. It takes maturity, certainly, I think, or wisdom. And
absolutely.
Wisdom.
And that reminds me, there's a recording from the actual conversations, because these conversations were taped, and we actually play a few of the conversations. Madeline, who is the head of Mass Citizens for Life, she talks about, we play the tape where she says, she was really conflicted about going public with this whole conversation, and she said, I believe that what you're doing at these abortion clinics is wrong. I believe it's wrong. But at the same time, having met you and gotten to know you, I believe that you're women of goodwill, and you think that you're helping women. And those two things are really hard to rationalize for me. To me, it was really profound encapsulation of the issue that they had to hold in their heads at the same time, like actual disagreement about something that is not just bad, but really like evil, right? And the goodwill and intentionality and care and generosity of the other person. And that was hard to reconcile, and yet maybe really crucial.
Yeah, I think
that I think it was harder for the pro-life people, as I've said before, because they really thought what we were doing was wrong, and baby killers. And we didn't feel that way. I mean, I've spent a lot of time thinking and talking about abortion as a moral choice, and written about it. And I think all three of us pro-choice women believe that we were helping women.
Yeah.
As you can understand, one of the things we never did was come to any kind of consensus or common ground on the abortion issue itself. As a matter of fact, one of the experiences was that we dug even deeper about why we believed what we believed.
Yeah, you don't often have the privilege of spending a great deal of time with people with whom you disagree vehemently, talking about the very thing you disagree with.
Right.
It's an extraordinary privilege.
It took us 2 or 3 or 4 years to finally figure out that we had two completely different worldviews, and those were expressed in the original article. And that informed a lot of the conversation that we had.
I think we knew we had different worldviews, but you demanded that we write them down, and the pro-life people did theirs in about a minute, because and the three pro-choice people were all over the place. We have very different worldviews. We are, an Episcopal priest, and Nikki was a kind of non-practicing Lutheran or Methodist, and Melissa was a non-practicing Jew. And so it took us a longer time than it took them.
I really don't think we knew that it was a different worldview in the beginning, at least from the pro-life perspective. We had always thought that human beings shared some sort of a different kind of a worldview. I really did not realize how different it was until later in the conversation. But it was helpful to articulate it, to see
Well,
it.
I think, we all live in bubbles. We surround ourselves with people, you know, who are like thinkers. It's just
Well,
much easier.
It's not easy to do that in Boston, Ian. As a young attorney in the 70s, it was difficult to be pro-life. Almost
mm,
everybody was
Oh, I'm
pro-choice
sure.
with
I'm sure it was.
all the time to be pro-life. Yeah, for a woman at that
well, and
time.
I think what you mentioned too, Francis, I think with you saying the worldview, that really hit me because you talk about that in the series. And that was something that was really, because I think as the viewer, we're watching, we're waiting, we're watching this trial, we're watching this criminal, this heinous act happen, people lose their lives, and there's so many things that are going on. And then you women start to come together and you're having these conversations. And so I think for me, even I'm sitting on the edge of my seat going, okay, how did they come to an agreement? What was the profound words that they found that they could find common ground so that we can all use those same words, so that when we go into these conversations, we have a specific dialect that we can use. Like we're all good. Like we've got it. It's like, right, like you said, writing it down, right? And I can take that into the conversations. But when you said it, when you all mentioned that in the series about the worldview, you realize that I realized that too in that moment was we all come to the table and we have different worldviews. And so how do we come to the table and graciously have conversation that hopefully will continue to elevate and bring together a culture or generations, at least in some way, to love one another and be gracious to one another so this type of a crime doesn't happen again. I think
Well, uh, I think Fran and I are both want to emphasize that we never had the goal of finding common ground.
hmm,
Isn't that right, Fran?
Oh yeah, there was just no way we were going to move an inch.
Yeah, and
goal.
part of what happened is because we had to articulate our worldviews and
Mhm.
positions and beliefs,
Mhm.
we became more convicted of our own
Mhm.
righteousness, the righteousness of our, you know, we had to examine our position more deeply, I think, than ever before, and
Mhm.
that was hard and very good.
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, I know for me, watching it was,
Well, sorry. Can I cut in 1 second?
sure.
Just tell the editor to edit that all out and tell the audience that they solved the whole debate. Came to they came to they came to common ground, and watch the film and it's all solved. It's all resolved.
Well, do you know, Josh, what I love about that is you as the viewer, the audience, right? I'm like sitting there going, I know they've solved this entire problem, right? This worldview this is like, how can I come to the table and have this conversation? But when you all talk about that, where you didn't have the same worldview, it's the moment that we realize that really is, that's where we're all going to come to most likely on this topic. But how do we break bread and see one another in the image of God, right? Like, how do we see that? And so,
Yeah.
how do we then be able to communicate together? I have to say, for me watching it, I was a teenage mother. I had my first baby when I was 16 years old. I am also post abortive, and then I didn't have another baby until I was 30 and couldn't have any more children. So there's multiple things in my life, and going back in the testimony part for me was specific as I'm watching it, because when I go out and I talk to people, I have all these different things that I've actually experienced in my life to be able to share. And so for me to sit down and watch the basement talks was really profound, and it was a narrative that I was really excited to watch and hear, and women to express their view and have a conversation together. um, because I know how critical it is. I know how critical this conversation is for us today in our society. And so I just, I guess for me, there's only a couple things that I really am like, I'm still wondering about. Do you still have these conversations? Have you continued to have the basement talks? Are you still coming together on a regular basis and really talking about what's going on in our world and our culture today? And have you invited more women in to the conversation, if so?
Conversation has stopped. We did it for 17 years. and and I just want to say for the record that the fact that Josh and Sarah made this film feels like such a validation and such an opportunity to get our story out in a way that we had proposals to write a book. We could hardly write the article for the Globe, and to other documentary people came and went, and never nothing big ever happened after the Globe article until Josh came along with his vision.
The conversation certainly stopped, but the relationships have endured, I would say. Maybe we don't see each other very much, but we do keep in sort of loose touch. And this documentary has allowed us to see each other more again, which has been wonderful.
And we always have a good time.
Can I say something? I think I have two observations. One is that I think it's true that like the women are no longer meeting in a basement. And I think like the relationships still matter right now, right? Like we actually screened the film to them like a week after the Dobbs decision,
right?
Which was very stressful for us as filmmakers. One, like screening this film to women who don't agree on very much already.
Yes.
And then screening it at a time when this massively impactful event for all of their advocacy work had just occurred. And I remember being in this room feeling very nervous, and Madeline McComish walked in, and Madeline's like this lovely person who's like maybe 5 feet tall. She walked right up to Nikki, who's like 6 foot something, and Madeline gave Nikki this huge hug. And the first thing she said to her was, "We recognize this is not a moment to be exultant. You must be hurting."
Wow.
And that was such a profound moment to me, to see this moment where, like, in terms of advocacy, she had won, right? Like Madeline was holding the higher ground. Right. And this recognition of like the supremacy of the relationship above all else, even when you're on different sides of a decision.
And Fran and I had a similar conversation. She said, just, I know how you feel because we felt that way in 1973.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the other thing I would say, and then Josh can talk, is that I think also in a real way, this conversation that these women had in a windowless basement in Watertown gave rise to this whole movement of bridge building that is alive and well today. There's like hundreds of organizations, thousands of organizations, doing this work exactly, realizing that common ground isn't always possible and finding ways to facilitate peace and connection and relationships and functional moving forward nevertheless.
Yeah, these women probably don't even know the impact they've had because a lot of it's been on the movement itself, which really grew out of this experiment.
I mean, I think the techniques that were experimented on within this like uses experiments in this conversation have really become the bedrock of this whole movement that's grown out of it.
Wow. That has really been activated around this election season right now. A whole bunch of organizations are trying to keep the country together, and keep us get us through the next couple weeks.
Absolutely.
Maybe a couple months.
Absolutely.
So really, really timely in that sense.
Well, and that was one of the reasons too, I felt like, for all reasons, God has his perfect timing. And so even for us to be able to get together and talk today, just to be able to share your message. I mean, I know there's so much going on in our political world and the conversations. And I really do pray that more people will see the Basement Talks and realize how important this series is and the years and the history that have been behind this I don't think anybody realizes it. I have to tell you guys, I think that I hope that more people watch the Basement Talks because it's so critical for such a time as this. We really need it. And Francis and Anne, you ladies have moved mountains for people on both sides. And I'm so grateful. I've had multiple conversations with women that same thing, different points of view, different perspectives, different worldviews. And they're just really grateful for for the series, for your hearts and just an open and willingness to continue the conversation and relationships above all. So thank you for that. I think the last thing I would ask you all is, what are the hopes and the takeaway from the series? How do you want people where can they go and watch this? How can they get involved in their local communities? If you guys have some resources, we'd love to know about that. I know there's a lot of people that have asked me after watching the series, how do we get involved? How do we become part of a process? This seems more like a movement than just a docu-series. So maybe you can give me some information on that. This is big question, but.
Yeah, well, let me take some of those.
Yeah.
Sort of like maybe a final pitch for the film.
Yeah.
Which I'll just say, what I think is really brilliant about the series and how it turned out is the way in which the Basement Talks and the Salvi court case sort of echo and foil each other, right? Because a big part of the series, and I'm sure Fran and Anne disagree with how much of the trial they wish we would just cut it all out and just go to the talks. I know that because the trial is this whole thing, but a lot of the series really delves into the whole trial of John Salvi and the very true crimey elements. And what I found really important about it is, this court case, the attorneys, it's all very calculated, right? And very strategic and very public facing, right? So there's not only is the trial, directed at a jury and creating a certain narrative, it's also, the public trial. There's very much the courthouse steps and the pitching to the media. And so there's like this very calculated political world that is the trial of John Salvi. And it's a very interesting trial because, he was deeply schizophrenic. And so there's a whole question about why he even committed these murders. Was it out of the pro-life movement? Was it more conspiracy theory? And so that's all really interesting and very political and public facing, right? And then there's the Basement Talks, which is interpersonal, right? And it's not strategic, right? You're not. The whole point is to not be trying to come up with your answer while they're telling you, is to listen, right? And so they really foil each other, right? They're really the opposites in so many ways, and this all happened before social media, and yet it's the echo of social media, right? When you're on social media, there's always an audience. You're always maybe talking to someone, but you're also talking to everybody else. And so much of this, of getting together with people personally, right? And dialoguing, creating real relationships across these intractable differences is really important to maintaining our country. And that's what I think is the brilliance of the film, is that those two things are both really fascinating. The meetings, the Basement Talks, fascinating. The trial, fascinating. And they're so different. And they really speak and inform each other. So that's what I love about the series. And it just sort of came together. We just started following the story and digging it up, and that's what happened. So fascinating to have seen it develop from our end. And people can watch it on Amazon Prime and on Apple TV. And I really ask people to go there. It might still be on Tubi. Yeah, I think it'll be on Tubi as well. So they can go to those places to watch it, and please watch it and share it and get lots of people to watch it and share it on social media and interpersonally. Share it interpersonally.
Oh, yeah, and it's coming out
on public.
And also, it might be too late, but today and tomorrow it's coming out on PBS World. But then it'll be on their website and stuff. So it'll be called The Basement Talks is the series. PBS has a feature version, which is 87 minutes long, and that's called Public Enemies, Private Friends. It's the same story, but one really just focuses. It's the one that Fran and Anne would prefer you watch, which is focused on the conversation, has less of the trial and the true crime elements. And the series has more of that whole story. And then as far as getting involved in the movement, sorry talk so much.
No,
Yeah,
no. Listen, we could like sit here. I have so many things that I want to ask you all, and I know that I'm like trying to be very okay. Just talk
yeah,
about the show, but keep going, and the movement.
yeah. So to get involved in the movement, there's lots of organizations that have really grown out of this. Everything from living room conversations to
Braver Angels.
yeah,
Essential Partners is still doing well.
Essential Partners is still in Boston area, still working. That's what grew out of the Public Conversations Project. There's what is Peter Coleman's group? And Starts With Us is a good thing you can follow on social media. They post all sorts of content around bridge building. So there's tons and tons of ways to get involved. There's Bell Labs, which is trying to change or trying to impact Hollywood and movies to be more, less criminalized, more nuanced, and bridge building, so that we get that kind of content more often. So there's all sorts of people really invested in trying to save the country and rebuild the bonds across these differences that aren't going to go away. We're not going to create a democracy and have this eventually come to common ground on things. That's not what democracy. It doesn't exist that way. There's always going to be difference. So it's not about getting around the differences or solving all the differences. It's about maintaining a level of functional trust, and that's something we've really lacked lately. Our trust in each other has deteriorated, and it's going to take actual energy, actual funding, actual investment from activist organizations, as well as just average people, to really rebuild this level of functional trust, to help us get through our differences and to continue to live peacefully together.
So well said. And you guys, you all have just done a fantastic job. And so thank you so much for creating and being part of something, this narrative, this story that I do believe will open up a lot of conversations and bring people back to a table to talk about this. I love watching the little ones run in and life and just there's so many things, but this series really did move me. I just am so grateful that you've lent your voices to this for a number of years. I hope this continues to open up more dialogue and bringing people back and having a greater depth of relationship again. And really, like you said, Josh, bringing people back face to face. We need to put down the phones and we need to really start talking to people again and looking people in the eye and having deep conversations. So I'm really thankful for this series. But well, thank you all. There's many more questions that I have for y'all, but I just am grateful for your time, and I look forward to highlighting the series and doing anything I can to be a voice for y'all and continue the conversation. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much.